It's 2:14 a.m. Your eyes snap open. The room is dead silent, save for the faint mechanical hum of your refrigerator. You roll over, flinch at the glaring blue light of your smartphone screen, and immediately the anxiety sets in. I have to be up in 4 hours. Why can't I just sleep? If you're like millions of other people in the modern world, you've probably diagnosed yourself with insomnia. You've probably scoured the internet for sleep hacks, swallowed melatonin gummies, or cursed yourself for staring at a screen too late. Society tells you that if you aren't sleeping in one dead, unconscious 8-hour block, your hardware is malfunctioning. But what if your doctor, your sleep apps, and your own modern instincts are completely wrong? What if I told you that your 2 a.m. wakefulness isn't a glitch at all? It is actually a biological masterpiece. It is an evolutionary ghost, an ancient program written into your DNA over 300,000 years, begging to be executed. To understand why you are lying awake in the dark, and what you are supposed to be doing right now, we have to strip away everything you know about the modern night. We have to kill the lights. Imagine a darkness so thick, so absolute, that opening and closing your eyes makes absolutely zero difference. For 99.9% of human history, that was reality. When the sun dipped below the horizon, the world didn't just get quiet. It became a terrifying, high-stakes waiting room. Before our ancestors learned to manipulate their environment, they were just another primate on the menu. Our night vision is, biologically speaking, a joke compared to the nocturnal predators we shared the savannah with. Leopards, hyenas, wolves, they owned the night. For a prehistoric human, moving after sunset wasn't just risky. It was practically a death sentence. You found a tree, you found a cave, you huddled together, and you prayed for dawn. The human day was strictly bounded by the sun. Maybe 12 hours of life in the summer, and a brutal, terrifying 8 hours in the winter. Then, roughly 1 million years ago, in a place called Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, everything changed. We found the earliest solid evidence of a controlled fire. But to say humans discovered fire is missing the point. Humans didn't just discover fire, we discovered time. Think about the physics of a campfire. It projects a circle of light roughly 30 feet in diameter. Inside that 30-foot circle, you have warmth, vision, and a psychological safety net. Predators instinctively avoid the flames. Inside the circle, you live. Wander outside that circle into the pitch black, and your statistical probability of being eaten skyrockets. Even today, anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies observe this exact same brutal math. Those who stray from the fire at night rarely come back. But that 30-foot circle of safety did something else. It hacked the rotation of the Earth. It gave humanity something no other species had ever possessed: artificial hours. It extended the day by 2, 3, even 4 hours. And what we did with those stolen hours in the dark fundamentally rewired the human brain. We didn't just sit there staring at the flames. We started doing something that would eventually build empires, forge religions, and create the modern world. If you want to understand what those stolen firelit hours did to the human mind, you have to look at the people who still live in the echoes of that ancient world. In 2014, an anthropologist named Polly Weisner published a fascinating piece of research in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. She didn't just look at fossils or ancient ash. She spent years living among and recording the conversations of the Juhuansi, pronounced Juntuasi, Bushmen in the Kalahari Desert. They are one of the last remaining populations on Earth whose daily lives closely mirror the original hunter-gatherer lifestyle of our ancestors. Weisner tracked exactly what these people talked about, and she noticed a massive, undeniable shift the moment the sun went down. During the daylight hours, conversation was essentially a prehistoric Excel spreadsheet. About 80% of all daytime talk was strictly practical. It was logistics, economics, and complaints. Who is tracking that antelope? Which berry patches are dried up? Who owes who a favor? Daytime was for survival. Daytime was work. But at night, bathed in the flickering amber glow of the fire, the entire framework of human interaction shifted. Wehr found that at night, 81% of their conversations transformed into stories. They told sweeping myths about the origins of the stars. They gossiped about distant tribes. They told jokes that sent ripples of laughter into the dark. They engaged in deep, abstract thought. The campfire wasn't just a heater. It was the original theater. It was the first church, the first university, and the birthplace of human culture. Without the safety of the fire, our ancestors would have been forced to sleep the moment the sun dropped, just to stay out of the jaws of predators. We would never have developed the time or the cognitive space to imagine things that didn't exist yet. The fire gave us the canvas of the night, and stories are what we painted on it. But storytelling was only half of the nighttime equation. Once the embers died down and the stories ended, our ancestors went to sleep. And this is where modern science and history converge to explain that 2 a.m. anxiety you feel in your bed today. Because the way you sleep right now, forcing yourself into a continuous 8-hour coma, is a completely modern invention. You were never biologically designed to sleep that way. For the truth about this, we have to look at the work of historian Roger Ekirch. In 2001, Ekirch published a landmark paper that sent shockwaves through the field of sleep science. He had spent 16 years meticulously combing through historical archives, medical texts from the 1500s, ancient diaries, medieval court records, prayer books, and even passing references in Homer's Odyssey. Across hundreds of documents, spanning centuries and vastly different cultures, Ekirch kept finding the exact same phenomenon. Nobody in the pre-industrial world slept through the night. Instead, they experienced something called Biphasic sleep. Here is what a normal night looked like for thousands of years. People would go to bed shortly after dusk. They would sleep deeply for about 4 hours. This was universally referred to in historical texts as first sleep. Then, usually around midnight or 1 Langri a.m., they would wake up. And they wouldn't just toss and turn, frustrated that they couldn't get back to sleep. They would stay fully awake for 1 to 2 hours. This midnight window was so common, so entirely normalized, that it had its own name. It was called the watch. During this quiet, dark window, people did everything. A prominent 16th century French physician literally wrote medical advice suggesting that couples should conceive their children during the wakeful hours between first and second sleep, claiming they would do it better because their bodies were rested and their minds were clear. People didn't just have sex, though. They visited their neighbors. They stayed in bed and analyzed their dreams while the imagery was still vivid. Monks prayed. Writers wrote. Or, very often, people simply lay in the pitch black, staring at the ceiling, engaging in deep, uninterrupted reflection. After an hour or two of this quiet wakefulness, they would naturally drift off into second sleep for another 4 hours, waking up perfectly refreshed at dawn. So, if this was the universal human experience for literally hundreds of thousands of years, why didn't we know about it? Why did we think 8 continuous hours was the gold standard? The answer is a stunning example of modern bias and an experiment in the 1990s that dragged this ancient biological ghost back into the light. For a long time, historians who read these ancient accounts of first and second sleep didn't know what to do with them. The modern bias was so deeply ingrained that translators literally scrubbed the phenomenon from history. They would encounter ancient Greek or medieval Latin texts detailing this midnight waking period, and they would deliberately mistranslate it. They assumed the original authors were just describing normal insomnia, because the idea that the entire human race used to sleep differently was too massive to comprehend. It took a psychiatrist to prove the historians wrong. In 1992, at the National Institute of Mental Health, a scientist named Dr. Thomas Wehr decided to run an experiment that sounds like a mild form of psychological torture today. He took a group of modern, healthy volunteers, locked them in a controlled environment, and completely eradicated all artificial light. For one entire month, these participants were plunged into 14 hours of absolute darkness every single night. He essentially recreated the winter lighting conditions of our prehistoric ancestors. At first, the participants just slept. They slept like people who had been exhausted their entire lives, catching up on years of modern sleep debt. But then, a few weeks into the experiment, something incredibly strange began to happen. Without any prompting, without any clocks, every single participant's biology spontaneously mutated back to the prehistoric baseline. They stopped sleeping in one 8-hour block. Instead, their bodies locked into the exact same ancient rhythm. 4 hours of sleep, followed by 1 to 3 hours of quiet wakefulness, followed by a second 4-hour sleep. Nobody taught them how to do this. Their bodies just knew. It was an ancient, dormant program waiting in their DNA, buried under a century of electric light, finally allowed to boot up. But Wehr didn't just observe their sleep times. He drew their blood. He wanted to know what was happening chemically during those 2 hours of midnight wakefulness. What he found blew the lid off sleep science. During that middle-of-the-night window, the participants were not in a normal waking state. Their brains were bathed in massively elevated levels of prolactin. This is a fascinating hormone. It's the exact same chemical your brain releases during deep meditation, or the wave of absolute calm you feel immediately after an orgasm. The participants didn't report feeling anxious about being awake. They didn't toss and turn. They described an overwhelming sense of peace. It was a profound, reflective, deeply meditative state of consciousness. We didn't just change our bedtimes in the modern era. We literally eradicated an entire biologically distinct state of human consciousness. We killed the quietest, most peaceful hours of the human mind. And the weapon we used to kill it is sitting right above your head. The death of the human night didn't happen overnight, but historically speaking, it was a blitzkrieg. It started in the 1600s. King Louis XIV of France wanted to reduce crime, so he ordered the installation of the world's first widespread street lamps in Paris. London quickly followed suit. Then came the mass production of cheaper candles. Then gas lamps hissed to life in the 1800s. But the final nail in the coffin came in 1879, when a man named Thomas Edison commercialized the incandescent light bulb. Within a single generation, a relationship with the dark that had lasted for 300,000 years was permanently severed. We forget how deeply our ancestors respected and feared the dark. Think about the word curfew. It doesn't mean go to bed. It comes from the medieval French phrase couvre-feu, which literally translates to cover the fire. In medieval towns, a bell would toll, signaling that it was time to extinguish all flames. This wasn't just fire safety. Night was meant to be dark. Night was the domain of the vulnerable, the asleep, the criminal, and the supernatural. In many European cities, just walking outside after dark without a lantern was a literal crime. Then we conquered the dark. We flooded the streets, our homes, and eventually our pockets with blinding, artificial light. We called it progress. But here is the biological bill that came due. Today, the average modern human is blasted with artificial light for 7 to 8 hours after the sun goes down. And your biology is completely unequipped to handle it. The blue light emitting from your phone, your TV, and your LED bulbs actively suppresses your brain's production of melatonin, the master hormone that regulates your sleep. Here is the brutal truth. Your body does not know the difference between a 60-watt light bulb and the actual sun. When that screen light hits your retina at 11:30 p.m., while you're doom-scrolling, your brain genuinely believes it is high noon. It slams the brakes on melatonin. It fractures your sleep architecture. It violently disrupts a circadian rhythm that took millions of years of evolution to perfect. It is so easily disrupted, but it is also easily fixed. Researchers have recently proven that if you take a group of modern people and send them camping for just 1 week, stripping away all screens and artificial lights, their melatonin cycles physically reset by nearly 2 hours. Within 7 days, their bodies start dumping melatonin right at sunset, just like a hunter-gatherer. That is how close to the surface this ancient programming still is. Which brings us back to you, in your bed, at 2:14 a.m., staring at the ceiling, feeling broken, feeling like you have a disorder called insomnia. But what if you don't? What if waking up in the dead of night, lying in the dark, isn't your body malfunctioning at all? What if it's your body desperately trying to remember what it was built to do? For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors thrived in a rhythm we've completely forgotten. They gathered around the amber glow of fires, weaving the stories that built human civilization. They slept in 2 phases, perfectly designed to give them a window of profound chemical peace in the dead of night. They lived under skies so devoid of light pollution that the Milky Way wasn't a wallpaper on a phone. It was just the roof over their heads. Every night, in that quiet gap between first and second sleep, they lay in the absolute stillness. They analyzed their dreams. They processed their lives. They rested their minds before facing the brutal dawn. We traded that profound biological peace for a light switch. And the tragedy isn't just that we lost it. The tragedy is that most of us never even knew it was gone.